Stories that bring thoughts to your mind and inspire hope in your heart are stories worth telling. Hey everybody, this is vyi'an, and today I will be giving some thoughts on the 2.0 to 2.3 Penacony main storyline of HSR. With the Penacony story officially wrapping up with the epilogue this version 2.3, we can officially call it a finished story, and honestly, if you ask me my thoughts in one sentence, I would say that overall it is a better bedtime story than whatever depression fest that was served next door in Genshin. You know, I can actually go to sleep with a smile on my face after 2.3 and Penacony, but I was too depressed to do so after that Genshin quest. Ever since we've stepped into Penacony at the start of the year, I've been hooked on the storyline. I personally think that the characters and characterization, the slightly philosophical aspects that they dug into during the storytelling, and the world building and inspirations behind Penacony were really interesting. Most importantly, I think that the romanticism of life that the story is trying to get across, it really speaks to me, and it's time to admit that I am especially a fan of this type of story because I guess I am what is considered a hopeless idealistic romantic. Looking back on Penacony, we can actually truly say that it is a chill, carefree, upbeat story. Thanks, 小吉老师. When the Astral Express first arrived at Penacony, I really thought that this story was going to be a really dark one. After all, Penacony does have a background of being the previous jail and place of exile for IPC criminals, and this setting immediately made me think of Australia, and along with it, Franz Kafka's short story In a Penal Colony. For those who haven't read this story, there's actually a really morbid death scene in there, so I was actually really prepared for some horrible deaths to take place off screen or something. And plus, with Shaoji Laoshi's like famous last words in the 2.0 special program, I really thought that there was going to be something really bad happening. Additionally, the map design for Penacony made me think that it was inspired by an amalgamation of Las Vegas, New York, and Hollywood, and all three can be considered like sin cities, so that was why it was setting off all of the red flags in my head, and I thought that there was going to be something dark in this story. But then I was pleasantly surprised. The Penacony story isn't about anything dark, it's a discussion about existence, a simple discussion about life and why life is worth living. Alright, aspects of the Penacony story that I really liked. First of all, I really need to commend the fact that we were able to change perspectives within the story and able to play as a character that the perspective of the story was told from. With Penacony's super large story structure and with so many factions that follow different paths involved, who are trying to glean information about the watchmaker and what that entailed, it would have gotten very messy and very confusing if the Trailblazer was the only one to run all over the place and interact with every single faction in order to learn about their perspectives, motivation, and what they were doing at different times. This is definitely a great storytelling upgrade compared to the previous arcs, Belobog and Xianzhou Luofu, and with them spreading the bulk of the main story within 3 updates, 2.0, 2.1, and 2.2, Penacony's main storyline follows a really classic 3-act structure. 2.0 had the best storyline setup that I've seen in a while. It really takes the time trying to describe how the various factions of the cosmos arrived in Penacony and how the shifting alliances and intrigues start. Additionally, the Trailblazer's so-called date with Firefly was able to really let the audience get a sense of her character and form an emotional bond with her. And finally, the revelations that there were 2 deaths within the dreamscape. In fact, one occurred right in front of us. This really allowed for the Trailblazer and the Astral Express as a faction to get roped into the matter. 2.1 definitely focused on the question, why do we slumber, as an existential question, and this question was asked really early on in 2.0. From this chapter, we got answers to this question from Akron and Venturine. I do think that this particular chapter stood out because of the exploration of nihility and existentialism through these two characters, from both Acheron's dialogue with Tiernan and Aventurin's flashback to his own life in Sigonia. This chapter was definitely really well paced in terms of character development and writing, and it definitely made some emotions well up inside of me. For Aventurin, we see how his luck is both his greatest asset and the thing that took everything away from him. I do think that he is a very sympathetic character because of this type of development. And finally, even with the boss fight, I do think that it reveals a lot about Aventurin's thoughts and what the preservation really means to Aventurin. As for Acheron, I really do feel that this chapter allowed me to understand her battle with nihility and how she has this eternal sense of sorrow and sadness clinging to her. Alright, 2.2. I'll be the first to say that this was the longest quest ever. For me, it took over 7 hours because I was trying to process everything that was being thrown at me during the quest. And I must admit that at first I was actually quite fooled by the fake ending. I did question why the boss was only one phase, but I was too preoccupied by Jungyuan saving us to really tell. And then the only time I actually thought it was weird was because Dr. Ratio did absolutely chew out everybody around him when he was meeting with us for the supposed peace talks. But then I really only caught on when Black Swan came along and restarted everything. With all that being said, I do think that, again, 2.2 was a really well executed story in terms of plot and development, if not so much on the actual line delivery side, but I will go into that later. So I think that one of the most important things that was done well was the climax, the battle with Sunday, with the Astral Express and Robin. I do think that everything in that battle, from the atmosphere to the voice acting to the music by Robin and the Astral Express train just coming crashing down, was just great. Everything was great about that. Again, the characterization and clash between Robin and Sunday that was showcased was really, really nuanced. They are a pair of siblings. They both have idealistic ideas on how the world should work, but this led them down different beliefs and thus led to their different actions. Finally, 2.3 was the epilogue that I didn't believe was an epilogue at first. Because I was fooled by the first fake ending in 2.2, and then I noticed that the credits rolled. When the credits rolled again at the real ending of 2.2, I did actually take that at the time to mean that there was going to be more intrigue in 2.3, but it turns out that 2.3 was the true epilogue. And on some levels, I am very glad because I do think that all good stories need to have a fitting ending, and I do think that 2.3 was able to accomplish this. And we saw how times on Penacony are changing with the IPC starting to take control of things, and I am still glad that the Astral Express still has a voice in how things will go in the future of Penacony. Finally, I'm glad that there was a round of saying goodbye to everybody and paying respects to the trailblazers who came before us. After all of the good comes a small amount of bad. Here are the issues that I had with the Penacony story. It's definitely not long. First of all, I do think that there were definitely some pacing issues throughout. I believe that the entire Penacony quest length was around 20 hours, and while I'm all for more content, I'm not exactly sure that I absolutely needed to spend 7 or 8 hours in one sitting on a quest, or they could have also put a time warning on the 2.2 quest before you started, because at least for me, I sat down at 2 p.m. the day after the update to play, and I was like, oh yeah, I'll finish 2.2 before dinner and all will be good with my life. But then I realized that it took me up to 10 p.m. after eating dinner to finish it. Sometimes I do think that part of this is because the characters stretch out their dialogue too long. Some is a localization issue because Chinese prose can be more dense, but even then, I do think that some of the dialogue was way too long, and while it's good for the characters to be detailed, sometimes I do feel that their dialogue who are running in circles with the details. They're chasing their own tails and heavily alluding to something, but we're not expressly told what it is in the end. Other than the exposition and story structure nitpicks that I have one point about the story itself and character development. This might be a little controversial, but I really wish that they leaned more into Sunday's potential imagery as like a pseudo-god and like perhaps upped it a bit more with the religious imagery. Like, come on, he's named Sunday and he has the imagery of having like a literal metal halo above his head and chicken wings, I mean angel wings. And so I really feel like they could have leaned a bit more into that to develop Sunday's character a bit more. With just a bit more development in this direction, I really do think that he could have had more dramatic effect. Alright, now for my favorite part, story analysis. So what does Penacony's story actually want to tell and communicate with the audience? I do think that Penacony has two main messages that it wants to communicate with the player or the trailblazer. The first is a type of optimism, an optimism towards life that is behind extreme nihility. Because behind extreme nihility, there must be extreme existence. I think that it is really well summarized by Acheron in these few lines.
聆听、触碰、思考，由此你将获得感受。珍惜它，凭借感受，我们得以存在。这也是在虚无面前，人类唯一能给出的解答。倘若虚无是生命最原始的恐惧与战栗，任何一种崇高的信念，在它庞然的阴影下都显得微不足道。那么在这道影子的背后，也一定存在着世间最猛烈的光源。正如每一个迈向死亡的生命都在热烈的生长，向着虚无的尽头，我们追逐那最初的光。
Thus, from Penacony's story, we derive a type of romanticism for life, a type of soft critique and drive to live our own lives to the best. For me personally, the answer to the question, why does life slumber, is because we need to rest. We need to have the chance to dream and then to wake up and fulfill those ideals that we saw within our dreams. We as humans rest on our own accord and wake up on our own accord to see the world. This is a vast world, a vast cosmos with both good and bad, hope and despair, joy and sorrow. And then when we decide to walk within it, we extend our own experiences and are able to empathize with others. From Firefly, we detect the same will to live, to exist. She has never given up on herself despite her supposed fate as one of the Glamoth Knights. And as Jade reveals within the 2.3 quest, all of the Stellaron hunters are walking on the path of finality, but in the direction opposite to fate. While I don't necessarily think that this revelation is deeply related to Penacony's overarching theme of emphasizing existence and combating nihility, in a way you can see it as such, and I will interpret it as such. Fate can be considered as a very overarching, nihilistic thing and something that you can't combat, especially if you consider that fate of everything in the end is to die or to shatter. So going against fate is going against nihility. Again, some of the things might be set in stone, but we have one thing to do to combat the overwhelming feeling of emptiness. We can have our own experiences, and we can make our own choices. The second overarching theme that I would like to point out is a similar type of optimism, but a chorus about adventure and the path of the trailblaze. Personally, I feel like the story about the three nameless who left the Astral Express to help better Penacony was one of the highlights within the story. It was a story about how even across generations and origins, humans will always yearn to and strive towards betterment through adventuring and blazing their own path. Penacony was definitely a love letter to this type of romanticism, as it truly embodies the human nature to want to explore because of their curiosity and the sense of responsibility that allows people to blaze at the head of their paths. Honestly, Penacony has taught me a lot. It seems corny of me to say this of an anime video game, but it is genuine. Thank you, Penacony, for all of the elation that you have brought me within these past few months. I hope that the next time we meet, you will be able to throw a festival that truly lets you live up to your moniker as the land of the dreams, the land of festivities. Until then, as trailblazers, may this journey lead us starwards. I hope that the story I've analyzed and the thoughts that I have shared have evoked further thought and emotion, as that is what storytelling is for. This is vyi'an, and I'll see you in the next one. Or maybe not, we'll see. Thanks for watching, everybody.